Hi, and welcome to five Best Practices in Data-Driven Selling, a one-to-one webinar sponsored by Revana. I'm Tom Hoffman at One-to-One Media, and I'll be the moderator for today's event, where we'll explore best practices for leveraging customer and prospect data to improve customer retention, to drive higher conversion rates, and to boost customer value. Our speakers today are Don Peppers, who's founding partner at Peppers & Rogers Group, and Jonathan Gray, Vice President of Marketing at Revana. Don and Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Glad to be here, Tom.
Thanks for including me. Thanks.
Sure. So before we review the full agenda, I'd like to take a walk through the On24 interface to help familiarize our attendees with the platform. First, please turn off your pop-up blockers to enable interactive features. To download a copy of today's slides, please click on the green resource widget. If you have a question for one of our presenters, please click on the red Q&A widget and then type in your question and hit submit. If you encounter any technical issues during the webinar, please click on the help button located in the center of the toolbar. To learn more about our featured speakers, please click on the blue Speaker Bios tab in the lower right-hand corner of the toolbar. Also, feel free to tweet about today's webinar using the hashtag that's shown here. Now for today's agenda. In this webinar, our presenters will provide insights on the following: how customer data and statistical reasoning can be used to help companies achieve sales potential and to maximize customer value. We'll also explore the techniques that can be used to drive incremental sales from existing customers. Further, we'll examine how to increase inbound upsell cross-sell rates by matching callers with historical transactional and behavioral data. We'll also look at how predictive models and analytics can be used to forecast customers' potential value and to help prioritize leads. And then finally, we'll take a look at how leading companies are using data-driven selling to optimize business performance, including the use of customer data to help extend the life cycle of current customers that are at risk of being lost. And this will be followed by an audience Q&A with our speakers. So as we've come to learn, customers that are armed with smartphones and tablets and other web-enabled devices have more choices than ever between the products and the services that they buy. And because customers have so many options available to them, it's critical for companies to be able to develop effective engagement strategies for connecting with the right customers, but also for providing the right messaging through the most effective channels that they use. Of course, in order to engage effectively with customers and prospects, companies also need to draw upon what's known about them, their transaction histories, the channels that they use for different purposes, along with their interests and their needs. Fortunately, customers and prospects share quite a bit of this information about themselves through their omni-channel interactions. And this digital trail of information that customers and prospects leave behind them provides sales teams with incredible insights about their behaviors, about their needs, and their interests that can be analyzed and acted on to help drive higher conversion rates. Companies that are particularly adept at using customer data can strengthen the execution of their sales strategies and then deliver improved business performance. And here we're pointing to a 2002 study conducted by Aberdeen Group, where best-in-class companies, or as Aberdeen cites them, the top 20% of companies analyzed, have achieved significantly higher year-over-year increases in their attainment of team sales quota compared to companies that are considered to be industry average as well as underperforming or laggard companies. So clearly, companies that make effective use of customer data better position themselves to deliver more relevant and personalized messaging and offers that can result in improved business performance compared to organizations that overlook these opportunities. So at this point, I'd like to turn the discussion over to Don Peppers, who will share deeper insights with us on the business value of evidence-based decision-making. Don?
Thanks, Tom. Thank you very much, Tom. And I think that graph that we have up here talking about the divergence of performance of those companies that use data wisely versus those companies that are data laggards is quite telling. And in the rest of the webinar, Jonathan and I are going to try to talk to you a little bit about some of the practices that set these good performers up. Fundamentally around statistical reasoning. We talked about statistical reasoning. I'm going to spend a lot of time on that issue and evidence-based management. Now, we're here because primarily of Moore's Law. Everybody knows what Moore's Law. Every 20 years, computers get 1,000 times faster and cheaper. And people sometimes forget about what this really means, but we're now at a stage where computers are generating a ton of data, and I'm sure you've all heard this kind of statistic, but just in the last 2 days, we created every bit as much information as we did from the dawn of civilization up until 2003. That's the rate at which data is being thrown off by the computers that are running everything. I'll give you some other figures. Every second on the New York Stock Exchange, 33,000 securities trades take place. And, of course, every trade has to trade. It has to trade in a precise order, don't they? You have to keep track of those orders exactly. And, in fact, Google processes a petabyte of data every hour, and YouTube uploads 8 years' worth of video every single day. So Moore's Law means that these trends are going to continue to accelerate. But there's a corollary to Moore's Law that's sometimes colloquially known as Zuckerberg's Law. Every 20 years, we interact 1,000 times as much with others, 1,000 times more with others. So computers get, and if you think about your life as a consumer, 20 years ago, before you might have had a cell phone on you, before some people didn't even have email addresses 20 years ago for work. Nobody had broadband. There was no Facebook. There was no LinkedIn, no YouTube, no status updates of Twitter or text messaging. Today, you interact about 1,000 times as much with others, more with others, as you did back then. And 20 years from now, your children will interact 1,000 times more than you do with their friends and associates. Many of those interactions are automated. Some of them are algorithmic. That is, they're run on a kind of a formula basis by your own thing, but by your own technology. But the point is, it's driving consumers closer and closer to analyzing the buying process. There's something called the zero moment of truth. That's a term that was coined, I think, by Google. Jim Lisinski's book, Winning the Zero Moment of Truth, coined this term ZMOT. And ZMOT is that moment when a customer is Googling a product to compare prices while she's standing right in the store aisle. That's what you would call a ZMOT. Or a customer scans reviews of a product while sitting in a car in the store's parking lot, or even more, a customer checks the opinions of social network friends about a store before choosing which one to visit. Those are all zero moments of truth. Google did this research. They basically they looked at a number of different things. They looked at how consumers got online referrals from friends, whether a consumer became a friend or a follower of a brand. They looked at the blogs that consumers looked at, and mentions of brands on different networking sites, social networking sites, like Facebook and so forth. In analyzing all this data, what Google found, interesting enough, is that the rate at which these ZMOTs are increasing is accelerating. And in fact, in just the last couple of years, for instance, in 2010, the average shopper consulted 5 sources during a ZMOT. In 2011, the average consumer consulted 10. It's doubled in just the last year. And in 2010, only 19% of shoppers checked social sources, friends or friends of friends, But by 2011, that had also doubled to 37%. So there's a tremendous pace at which consumers are giving themselves access to this amount of this surplus of data that's out there. They're interacting with their friends. They're interacting with stores and brands and so forth. They're mining this data themselves. And the thing is, the more we interact, the more service we demand. Because think about it, we want interactions to be more efficient. So when you interact with a brand, you don't want to have any hassle. You want a frictionless customer experience. You don't want to have to reconstruct some fact that they omitted or check some issue that looks like they're biased on. In fact, we have a lot less patience with brands that can't interact at our own speed. We need the brands to interact at our speed, not yesterday's speed, but today's speed. And this brings me to another point, because the more interaction we have, the more trust we demand also. Now, consumer trust has always been important in businesses, right? It's always been a vital thing to have the trust of your customers. So that's nothing new. But what does trust really mean? Well, if I'm going to trust you as your customer, then what I'm saying is I trust your intentions. I trust that you're going to act in my interest. All right. But more than that, I'm going to trust your competence. I'm going to trust that you're competent to carry out these intentions. And both those things have to be positive. Look at if you're in the position of that baby being thrown up in the air by his dad. Okay, he's got two questions in his mind: is his dad competent enough to catch him on his way down, and does his dad want to catch him on his way down? Right. So both those things have to be positive for me to trust you. Another way you could look at this is competence is doing things right, and good intentions is doing the right thing. You could look at it that way. Well, there's now a higher standard. Because we interact so much with others, it's no longer enough simply to refrain from cheating or deceiving customers. It used to be that if you didn't cheat anybody and you didn't lie to them, then you were basically honest and people would trust you. But that's not enough anymore. In fact, what consumers expect is they expect proactive trustworthiness. They want you to proactively protect their interests. The other day I was looking through an article, and it had mentioned a book that I hadn't got yet, and I thought, well, I really ought to get that book. So I went right to Amazon, where I'm a subscriber to Amazon, a member of Amazon, and I navigated to the book. I clicked on it, so it would come to my house with one click. They already have my credit card information. They already have my address. It's a very convenient service. But I clicked on this book to order it, and instead of getting the book, I got a warning message from Amazon. Warning, you already bought this book from Amazon. Are you sure you want to buy it again? Now, just think about that for a second, because Amazon could easily have just sold me this book. It was my mistake, not theirs, that I was ordering a second copy. I forgot that I already had it, but that was my mistake. I wouldn't suspect them of cheating me if they just proceeded with my order. But what they're doing instead is they're using their database of data, their data, which is far superior to my database, to remind me that I'm about to act not in my own interest. And what do they get from it? They don't get the sale, but they get my trust. They get my relationship. They get my long-term loyalty as a customer. And this proactive trustworthiness is an important enough quality that Martha Rogers and I call it trustability. When we use the term trustability, what we're talking about is being proactively trustworthy with your customers. So if you go back to that original definition of trust, extreme trust or trustability is doing things right, doing the right thing proactively. Now, we're all surrounded by data, right? Lots and lots of data. But there's a logical question to ask. How do you decide what data to trust? Well, Martha and I suggest that if trust in another person or party is based on your assessment of that person's competence and good intentions, then trust in data or information is based on whether you assess that information to be accurate and objective. Accurate means it's competent, it represents reality to the best of its ability, and objective means it's unbiased. It has your best interests at heart. It's not trying to sell you something. It's not trying to bias your conclusion, whatever. Accurate and objective or unbiased. I think as we go into the data-rich future, more and more of this kind of information test is going to be required of companies, and assessing information that's accurate and objective and understanding what it means for a business really requires better business practices on the part of executives, something that I sometimes call evidence-based management. You may have heard of the movement evidence-based medicine in doctors' offices. The AMA recommends that doctors practice evidence-based medicine. What they mean by that is before they diagnose a patient, they look up the symptoms and they look at what the data says. In other words, they try to withhold their judgment and remain open-minded until they at least review the existing data and refresh their memories about what the data has shown so far. Unfortunately, most people don't do this. Intuitively, what we do instead is we leap to a conclusion based on a hunch, and then what we end up doing is we screen the data and look for data that supports our contention, our idea. We are prone to the confirmation bias. But that's not the scientific method. The scientific method is based on accuracy and objectivity. Karl Popper said, something is scientific if it's inherently disprovable. The only kind of scientific theory that is valid is one that has some conditions under which you could say this theory is false. That would be a scientific theory. And one of the important roles of scientists is they're constantly trying to disprove the theories that they already believe in. In fact, all science is a process of revising existing beliefs and theories and making them more and more sophisticated. One process in evidence-based management that companies need to understand is the issue of test and control. Test and control. You've probably heard of A/B testing, where I've got a website and I put up one advertisement to one audience and an identical audience. I put up another advertisement. So it's a advertisement and a B advertisement, and I test them. Google's a master of this. They run literally millions of A/B tests daily, constantly checking and tweaking and checking and tweaking. What a lot of people don't realize statistically is that when you run your test and you come up with the right result, you come up with the ad that draws the best, let's say, or the offer that sells the most, and then you roll it out. The rollout almost always, much more often than not, the rollout underperforms the test. Now, why would that be? Why would that happen? This is an issue of statistical reasoning. This is the kind of thing that you have to be able to understand as an executive dealing with a data-rich world. The test is likely to be underperformed by the rollout primarily because it was a test, and you test hundreds of things. Those tests will vary a little bit randomly. The tests that for random reasons score well, you're going to roll them out, okay? But the tests that for random reasons score low, you don't roll those out. So there's a kind of a one-way error introduced in your option to choose which to run with. That's a principle of statistical reasoning. And you should always test the null hypothesis. I mentioned in the scientific method, scientists are always trying to disprove their hypothesis, trying to test the negative. That's a very, very important point for businesses around the world. Let me tell you an interesting story that illustrates this point. In the World War II time frame, the Allies were sending out waves of strategic bombers over Europe. And in the initial part of the air war, they would sometimes lose 10 to 15% of the bombers would not return. They were massive and unacceptable losses. Clearly, they can't sustain those kinds of losses for the duration of the war. They can't lose 10 to 15% of their bombers on every run. Now, all these bombers were brought down by flak damage. And flak, anti-aircraft flak, was basically they send up, the Germans would send up anti-aircraft shells up into the air, and these shells would burst. They're like grenades going off randomly in the air. And some of the grenades would bring planes down and some didn't. And so it was clear that the Allies needed to place armor on their airplanes. But where? Should they place armor around the engines? Would that make more of their bombers to return? Or should they protect the cockpit? Is it the fuel tanks that they have to put armor around? And obviously they can't armor the whole airplane because it would be too heavy. They not only wouldn't be able to take off with bombs, it probably wouldn't be able to take off at all. They can only armor a few places on the airplane. So the way they decided what places to place armor on these bombers was they looked at all the returning bombers. They did a statistical analysis of all the returning bombers, and they analyzed what places on these returning bombers suffered no or little flak damage. And those are the places on the bombers that they began arming for future missions. Why? Because it's obvious. The airplanes that had suffered damage on those places didn't return, did they? And that's an example of null hypothesis. But let me give you a practical example in business terms. There is a European bank, Team Bank, that grants mortgages to homeowners. Every year they grant millions of homeowner mortgages, and also every year they intentionally grant thousands of loans to unqualified applicants who clearly do not qualify under their criteria for mortgages. And so the question is, why? Why would Team Bank do this? Well, they do it for evidence-based reasons. They do it because they're testing the null hypothesis. They're testing whether their criteria are accurate or not. Maybe their criteria are wrong. So here's a homeowner, a person who wants to be a homeowner, wants to borrow, doesn't qualify for some reason, but Team Bank selects them out, grants the loan on a random basis, and then tracks the performance of the loan. And suddenly, guess what? They've got this homeowner that didn't qualify, but now he's actually paying the loan off, and the loan performs very well. Guess what? They've just proved their criteria may not be as valid as they thought it was, and so they're constantly tweaking and updating their criteria. Now, none of the ideas that I've given you require you to be able to calculate a standard deviation or a variance correlation. You don't have to do the math. Computers will do the math. But human beings have to, business managers have to be capable of this kind of strategic reasoning in order to deal with the data that we're being surrounded with. And now we're entering the era of big data. What big data really means, what it really means is that there are things that you can do today on a large scale that simply cannot be done on a smaller scale. Waves, mountains of data are being thrown off by the computer programs and web browsers and other machine tools that we use in our daily business existence. Now, let me give you some examples. Zoom is a money transfer website, and they noticed that there was a slight aberration in the number of Discover Card transactions originating from New Jersey, and this actually revealed a criminal ring's activity just through a scan of the big data. Or consider a company called AirSage. They use the geolocations of millions of mobile phones, which they can collect automatically, and they do real-time traffic reports in more than 100 U.S. cities. It's residue from the data. Or there's a company called MarketPsych, and they do real-time sentiment analysis. They compile indices across 119 countries on a minute-by-minute basis to measure sentiment. Okay, so they can measure when the sentiment is turning up or turning down in a particular country, and they sell this data for quite a bit of money to investors and hedge funds. big-time companies that want to invest billions of dollars before the markets in the countries they're investing in figure out that the mood is about to turn south and so forth. Let me give you another example of a big data company. And let's start with the problem that it was trying to solve, which has to do with the Consumer Price Index. Now, the Consumer Price Index costs $250 million a year to maintain. It's maintained by the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the Department of Labor by the U.S. government. Department of Treasury. More than 80,000 prices are sampled monthly. Weeks are required to prepare each Consumer Price Index report, and that's the way the CPI is produced by the government. So two professors at MIT launched a business called PriceStats. What PriceStats does is it crawls the web for over 500,000 prices on a daily basis. That's 200 times as much data as the CPI uses, okay? And they generate real-time, day-to-day price inflation information, which they sell to banks, media, and citizens. Importantly, you don't have to wait 6 weeks to get the data. You remember when the Lehman Brothers meltdown occurred in September 2008, and it took 6 weeks. So, economists expected that bankruptcy would cause a deflationary fluctuation in the economy, and it did, but it was 6 weeks before the CPI pointed out. But PriceStats pointed it out the next day. The price deflation became evident literally the next day and within the next few days after the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy. So what PriceStats does is compiles real-time data for countries. So let me give you an example. Here is a graph of CPI is the blue line, which only comes out every month or so, right? And the purple line is PriceStats data, which is more real-time. And by the way, PriceStats data is available in real-time. So these are the CPI data that you see for October 2008 wasn't available till November 2008, for instance. Okay, but you can see how closely the PriceStats data tracks with the CPI in the U.S. Something very interesting that PriceStats has found out by doing this in countries around the world is that there are some countries that aren't quite as honest with their inflation figures. Here is Argentina's official CPI data, the blue line, and the real inflation rate, which is measured by PriceStats, is that purple line. And this points out something very interesting about big data, about the surplus of data that we're entering, the amazing amount of data right now. What it points out is that data operates like transparency, okay? It increases the amount of transparency in a system, and transparency is like a disinfectant for businesses and governments. It's going to clean things up, but first, it's going to sting like hell. So we're entering a very transparent world. As consumers, you have access to more data than ever before. Today's big company analytics program is tomorrow's consumer smartphone app. How do you make money as a business in this kind of world? And that's what Jonathan is going to talk to you about next. There are 5 practices for data-driven selling, 5 best practices for data-driven selling. Jonathan, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Don. That was awesome. And I'm looking forward to sharing best practices in data-driven selling. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Revana. We acquire and grow and retain customer relationships on behalf of clients faster and more profitably than clients can do on their own. We've won the Sales Outsourcing Provider of the Year 2 years in a row, and thought we'd share a bit of our secret sauce with everyone today in the 5 best practices for data-driven selling, because effective selling really can be taken up a level or two when you follow these types of best practices. So my goal today is to walk you through each of these 5 best practices and give you an example from the annals of Ravana history. So we'll talk about the best practice of how to reach your sales potential and maximize customer value. We'll discuss how to drive incremental sales from existing customers. We'll discuss how to increase inbound upsell, cross-sell rates by matching callers with historical, transactional, and behavioral data. And the 4th, we'll review the use of predictive models and to analyze and forecast customers' potential value that helps to prioritize leads. And finally, how to extend the life cycle of current customers at risk of being lost. So the first best practice in data-driven selling is to reach your sales potential and maximize customer value. And this entails leveraging analytics to identify that next best action, including the routing to the proper sales team and what offers should be presented. We also look to automated marketing and campaign tools to trigger the right content for the right audience and, in fact, through the right channel. And I'd like to give you an example of how that can come to life, because it really has a dramatic impact on the customers when you do this the right way. So initially, for one of the largest wireless companies in the world, we actually helped to engage with their customers to drive cross-sell, upsell. But in the beginning, you have to make sure that you're bringing these customers into the right environment and presenting them with the right offers. So initially, we're looking at a host of different data sets in order to prioritize the best customers to interact with and who should provide that interaction. So the outbound call is followed by analytics-driven touches, and we utilize multiple channels. So let me give you some more background behind that. So we're routing based on prioritization. We have scoring of these different opportunities in a low, medium, high fashion. We leverage specific attributes in the modeling, looking at things like value and recency and segmentation. And then we're comparing the conversion results. So there's always test and control that's part of the evidence-based approach that we leverage in order to ensure that we are accomplishing the best performance results that are possible with the data that we have and the customer opportunities that we have. So we also create offer recommendations based on the analysis, looking at the device and the plan, the promotional offers that are out there. But one of the lessons that we have as part of our best practices is engaging with the sales teams for input to make sure that we're aligning the operational execution to match up with the opportunities that we see through the data and the opportunities. And then based on the results that we see, we can also prioritize the next follow-up interactions and those channels. And the results that we see are dramatic. So for this particular client, we actually decreased the list penetration by about 6%, but we increased the sales by 29%. That grew the average revenue per customer by 20%, and the treated customers that we engaged in this process represent about $1.2 billion in annual sales for this client. So certainly the analytics have had a significant effect on improving the performance and helping this client achieve some tremendous results. The second best practice in data-driven selling is to drive incremental sales from existing customers. And using CRM data and bringing in other information to the predictive analytics process is what's helping us to reach customers at particular stages of the buying cycle and be able to use that information to drive incremental performance from the sales process. So for one of the world's largest auto manufacturers, we leverage data and analytics to boost the sales performance in the lead follow-up process. So how this works is we look at the leads with the lowest conversion rate. So the ones that were doing well were the ones that we allowed to stay with their process while we worked to test and control on some of the harder to sell to groups of customers. And we explored the opportunities there by analyzing the information for those different leads based on the online source that they came from, whether they were third parties or organic, the timing when they were received, the tenure of the customer. And we tested also the contact strategy for those different groups. For organics, it was a combination of calls and emails. For the third parties, it was fewer calls and emails. But then we also had a control group. What we found was there was a sweet spot in terms of when to engage with these customers based on when the lead was received. And it certainly, stands to reason that sooner is better, as we all know from when leads are put online. You want to engage with them quicker. But one of the things that was very important was to understand that there was less time sensitivity around the luxury models. And what this helped us to do was to optimize the staffing and the sales plan so that we could engage with those most critical opportunities that had the shortest shelf life, and then prioritize those that might have a little bit longer shelf life so that the resource plan that we had could accommodate the maximum potential to drive revenue. The results were $28 million of incremental profit and a 10% lift in the conversion rate for these tough-to-convert leads, and a 50% increase in the propensity to purchase. And as the client looked at their internal return on investment for the program, they told us that it represented over 11,000% of internal ROI, which we had to make sure that we were using their data, because if we'd come up with that, people probably wouldn't believe it. So on to the third best practice in data-driven selling, to increase inbound upsell cross-sell rates by matching the callers with transactional and behavioral data. So data that actually helps to route to the most qualified salesperson for that particular caller's needs. And this becomes very apparent when you think about the retention cues for a sales operation, and realizing that for many of these customers that would, from analytics, be scored as a retention opportunity, having them addressed by a sales team can help to improve the performance of that particular engagement with those customers. So for one of the top cable and communications companies in the U.S., we leveraged the data-driven selling capabilities in our analytics team and data scientists to help a sales team improve the performance through 4 different aspects. So the operation that's going on in the background is that we are taking inbound calls and chats. We're welcoming customers. We're actually following something of a guide in our consultative process, and then making sure that we are using best practices in sales techniques and how to communicate to understand the needs and then tailor the offer specifically for those customers. And the result is revenue and customer satisfaction increase. So we spent the analytics going on in the background are things like value and vulnerability modeling to prioritize customers and match them with the best sales group to engage them. So the results of this lead to increased bundle rates, increased attach rates, improved satisfaction, because you're matching them with the groups that are most likely to be successful engaging with those customers. Secondly, we also developed new sales performance metrics by looking at performance correlations and the specific metrics that indicate that correlate with the best behaviors. And this, again, is done in concert with the sales leadership group, because we want to make sure that we're reinforcing the sales behaviors that drive the best performance, as well as represent the highest improvements in customer satisfaction as well. And we identified one metric that was a combination of several metrics. We called it the percentage of the gold package sold. And by leveraging that particular metric as really the focus for the team, we created a situation where it helped to raise, kind of had a rising tide effect on other metrics as well. So the analytics team, looking at sales performance metrics or data and specific metrics, was able to identify a metric that was best to focus on to drive performance for the team overall. The third way that we've used analytics with this group is in the understanding the correlations of chat with revenue and customer satisfaction. So we're able to understand what really drives improved revenue and customer satisfaction, tune the chats themselves and the goals for chat. And the result was an increase in close rates of about 6 percentage points, and an understanding that those that actually deliver the highest NPS have the highest close rates as well, and those that are delivering, so you can make sure that you're not just thinking of sales as a sales action, but really a holistic experience for the customer, because it needs to result in higher satisfaction as well. And finally, we engage significant analytics resources to look at detractors, and we'll have an example of this in a bit. But as we look at customers who are less than satisfied and their verbatim responses, so speaking of big data and sentiment, you need to look at those for feedback to be able to provide back to the marketing and product and the operations to revise the messages and the offers. And being able to see those different messages and then react to them has had a significant impact on this client's business. Leading customer satisfaction rates, leading conversion rates have resulted in over $18 million in recurring monthly revenue as we work across over 300,000 orders for new and existing customers. The fourth example of best practices in data-driven selling is how to use predictive models and analyze and forecast customer value. So you want to look at customer data and look for insights to help identify the highest likelihood to buy customers to take best advantage of your scarce sales resources. So for one of the world's largest hardware manufacturers, we actually engage our Ravana associates as account managers on behalf of this client to sell servers to the public sector, whether it's state and local or higher education or even federal governments and the Department of Defense. So, but these are, as you might imagine, very highly skilled and valuable resources. So we wanted to make sure that we were having them focused on the customers with the best opportunity to purchase. And we wanted them to be able to communicate with these customers in all of the different ways that account might be interested in interacting. So the Bureau of Land Management, for example, they're out on the road all the time. They might not be in front of a computer, so you have to have mobile techniques in order to engage with those customers, and instant messaging and text messaging. For others who are IT folks, you definitely want to have social media capabilities because they're interested in reviews and engaging with the latest of technologies. So we leverage a social rep page that actually allows the business-to-business account manager to communicate through voice, email, chat, and update their Twitter and LinkedIn straight from that site and provide feedback back to the analytics team on what our customer is looking at. What do they use? What feedback are they providing? What have they downloaded? And then we use that information to help us prioritize which customers we should interact with and in what priority and through what channel. So the customer history, the products they've purchased, the offers that they've responded to and those that are available, the channel preference that we've seen, and then specific company information like company size and their response to downloads. All of those are attributes that the modeling uses to prioritize the recommended calls for that next day. And those are also prioritized in the CRM environment for the account manager to know who they should interact with and what the reason for that interaction is. So bringing together this type of analytics drove a 10% increase in conversion rate as we compared it to the control group, and results in about $100 million in new revenue from this team that's equipped with these capabilities. So the fifth and final best practice in data-driven selling that we'll review today is how to extend the life cycle for current customers that are at risk of being lost. And this entails analyzing unstructured data and using comments from customers to determine what should be done next with them, and then having a process of leveraging data and the customer feedback to create a much improved experience. So for one of the most recognizable auto manufacturer names, we created a program to be able to engage with customers who had a less than satisfactory experience. And this means gathering information from surveys and customer history, product information, targeted offers, interactions and feedback on social sites, and then also database of information to be able to identify customers that have had a negative experience. And as you know, most auto manufacturers do a great job of surveying for after a sales or a service interaction. But if there's a negative response, this is where our team comes in. So we look at the verbatims and the sentiment analysis of those different surveys to be able to understand which of those customers that have a critical and urgent need, and then understand through data how to prioritize what's the best interaction to have with them. And we make an outreach to that customer in an effort to satisfy them. So if they had a poor experience, reaching out on behalf of this manufacturer to say, if you had a bad experience with a dealer, we want to make it right. And that's done through either voice and then communications, and then can turn into emails or other modes of communication as required to satisfy that customer. And the severity of the comments does determine what the outreach strategy would be. And we leverage control groups in order to validate that we're having an impact on the customer experience. And the results are a 5 percentage point lift in conversion rate, which in this case represent about a 23% improvement in actually selling to customers who've had a poor experience. Because in most cases, as we know, if someone is raising their hand to complain, they are engaged at least. If they just went off on their own, sometimes that can be even less likely for you to be able to turn them. But if they are dissatisfied and they expect more of a brand, that's a great opportunity to try and demonstrate the brand's commitment to them as a customer when the going's tough. And that can build long-term loyalty. So in this particular program, we were able to improve the sales rate from these very customers who were dissatisfied, and resulting in a 1,200% internal rate of return on investment. So these are 5 examples of best practices in data-driven selling. And I wanted to, again, express my appreciation for everyone joining this, and hope that have an opportunity to engage with you about your own opportunities and how these techniques could become part of changing your trajectory from a sales performance perspective. And at this time, I'll hand it over to Tom.
Great. Well, thanks, Jonathan. I love these client examples and the results that they've been able to achieve, including the one that you pointed to earlier about the auto manufacturer and how they've been able to optimize the lead follow-up process. So at this point, we'd like to go into the audience Q&A with our presenters. But before we do, just a few reminders. If you'd like a PDF copy of the deck, click on the Download Presentation button at the bottom center of your screen. If you missed part of the presentation or you'd like to share it with a colleague, all attendees will receive an email with a link to the archived version. I'd also like to remind everyone about the survey that's posted during the Q&A period. Please take a moment to participate. Again, to do so, you'll need to turn off your pop-up blockers to enable the survey. So let's jump into the Q&A. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, click the Submit Question button in the lower left-hand section of your presentation window. And if we don't get to your question today, we'll be sure to email you a response. So, Jonathan, this first question came up for you, and the attendee is wondering, does Revana work with any direct sales-based organizations?
We are kind of a direct sales-based organization on behalf of clients. And I think for us, what's the delight for us is looking at all the different types of opportunities to engage customers on behalf of brands. So from a direct sales perspective, we certainly discuss what the opportunity might be and see if it's a great fit for our skills and the business model that we have.
Okay, thanks. Jonathan, can you also speak to some of the techniques that were used by the automotive company that Ravana worked with to identify and then act on customers that were at risk of defecting?
So the techniques in that process, it's a great process, and it leverages everything from survey capabilities to verbatim analysis that's actually looking at sentiment analysis to understand how critical this client's or this customer's need is. And the analysis in the background of that is some statistical analysis looking at not only the sentiment, but then also what you have from past customer information, whether it's a prior history of purchases, whether it's information about from the other sources of data, have they a lead that's been submitted as well, and then correlating or combining those to prioritize for contact those that have a most critical need and those that have a need that's potentially able to be addressed by each of the different groups that would need to be involved. And then based on that, there's routing that takes place, and then the prioritization for interaction that occurs and presented in a Salesforce.com environment for CRM to for an individual to actually make an outreach. Sure.
Okay, thanks. Donna, a question has come in for you. You were talking earlier about trust, and one of our attendees is wondering if you can offer some recommendations for developing trust with prospects that may not have much background or experience with a company.
Sure. I think one of the most important aspects of trust, the way your customers look at you, is they're going to make a very quick judgment with respect to whether you're acting, whether you appear to be acting in their interest, even if it might conflict with your own. So one of the shortcuts to developing the trust of a customer is to look for those situations where you have an opportunity to act in their interest when it's actually not in your interest. I mentioned what Amazon does when they remind you that you're about to buy a book that you already bought. Clearly they're not acting in their own short-term interest would be to sell you the book. But another idea, which I've recommended more than once to some companies, especially in large B2B operations, is look for opportunities to, I'm just going to sound nuts, okay, but look for opportunities to recommend a competitor to your current customer, a client. It shouldn't be gratuitous, but whenever there's an opportunity that you can actually say, hey, these guys have a product that we don't, or it does something better than ours does here. Let me just give you one example. Syngenta is in the agrochemical business, and they sell a variety of crop protection and insecticide products to potato farmers in South Africa. And in South Africa, there are 4 different environments for growing potatoes, and each of these environments has its own pests, its own growing season, and so forth. So Syngenta put together what they call potato packs. And the potato pack is a packet of information bound in a notebook that they can provide to potato farmers on the best chemicals and other practices for their particular region in South Africa, given different threats. You know, if you see this kind of pest, then here's what's best for this. What's interesting about the potato packs, however, is that in at least a couple of instances, Syngenta actually recommends the use of competitor products, not Syngenta products, because Syngenta doesn't have all the pesticides and herbicides necessary to protect potato crops in all 4 regions. And this has dramatically increased the trust that potato farmers have in Syngenta. They look at Syngenta as a trusted advisor, a company that literally has their interests at heart. And it's a very simple practice to do. So I would look for those instances, if you want to develop trust with customers, look for those instances where you might have an opportunity to act to protect the customer's interest, even though it's overtly not in your own interest financially to do so. And those will tend to build trust very rapidly.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's a terrific example. Jonathan, another question has come in where an attendee is asking if you can share best practices on how to balance Salesforce energy for retaining clients that represent a loss, as at least that's represented by the data that we have about clients that are generating a loss for the company, and trying to strike a balance between that and caring for new and existing clients.
No, that's a great question, and it's certainly a challenge, but I think it's one that really gets to how do you measure and manage from an accountability perspective, and then the goals and rewards. Because I think it's important for the salespeople to understand the value that they're delivering to that customer, and then at a larger scale to the brand and client over time, because the customer lifetime value is what's really being impacted there. And this gets to really needing to have that great coordination between the analytics and the goals that are being established for the front line, because you may be writing down a customer's revenue. So if they were on a wireless plan for $120 and they called in and said, I'm going to switch to a competitor, and the way to save them is to put them on the $85 plan, that salesperson feels like they weren't successful. I mean, obviously they're doing everything they can from a consultative approach, identifying other needs, other ways to try and encourage that customer to purchase value-added services to keep that revenue at the right level. But by creating a great experience for that customer to get right-sized can mean that that customer is going to stay with the brand so much longer, so they've truly had a positive impact on the customer's lifetime value to the brand. And but in the accountability and the management and the metrics and the goals for that individual and for the sales team, it needs to be cognizant of the positive impact that they're having on the lifetime value of the customer, which you'll always need to test and measure and make sure that it is continuing to have the expected impact, but it should be seen as a win. And the account manager and the salesperson needs to see that as a win as well. And I think that's incumbent on the leadership team and the goals that are being established and the way that that's being measured.
Thanks. That's great advice. So, Jonathan, we also have a question that came in regarding the use of social customer data. And one of the attendees is wondering if you could point to some ways in which information that customers share in social networks can be blended with other customer information, such as transactional or behavioral information, to help shape offers to them.
No, I think that's great. So a couple different examples. One is there's difference between interactions on a branded site where a customer has logged in so that you actually know them and you can associate them with your structured data. And when you can do that, then it's a great opportunity to recognize either their sentiment or the particular products or offers that they're interested in and engage with that customer directly. If you're in a more unstructured environment, then the monitoring and engagement is something that can be done proactively by a group of people who are looking for customers who have questions. The holy grail that's out there for all of us right now is linking Identities, which has, it's something that all marketers are curious and interested in to try and see, can personas be linked? And then we have to be very responsible and trustworthy and trustable about how we would use that data. But more of that is coming forth as companies continue to progress on that front, and will give us some opportunities to really meet the needs of customers in new ways based on the social interactions and data and requests that they have. We just need to make sure we do it in a trustable way.
And by the way, while we're on that topic, the question of identifying customers in social media is going to be answered technologically, but because your social graph is an extremely telling identifier. So everyone has a unique social graph. So when you're looking at social data, as long as you have access to a selection of somebody's friends or colleagues, you pretty much can get a fairly good ID reading on them. Then the question is, can you match that particular ID with the ID you have maybe from, is this the same Jonathan Gray that participated with us on the e-commerce site or not?
Right. Those are excellent points, Don. Thanks. So, Jonathan, can you also provide an example of how a company might be able to draw on information that's known about a customer to customize an offer on the fly?
Thanks, Tom. Absolutely. So I'll give another wireless example, and I think we're all familiar with these. Based on the products that we have and the usage that we have, the 10-year prior sales interactions. you can use those to identify a predictive score for the potential value of that customer. You can also create a potential risk score based on you've seen customers with similar attributes and have they been at risk for churn. And then prioritizing the contract renewal with specific offers is a great way to look at low-hanging fruit. And if you take that out of the wireless industry, is true for others where you have opportunities for subscription services and renewals. Leveraging the customer data and their usage information and having a sense of that from a segmentation perspective and prioritization can really help to focus on what's important and what will can create some really quick wins as far as customers that haven't been looked at with the right approach. And that's part of best practices Ravana has used to help clients be quite successful.
Great, thanks. Yeah, those are terrific points. So that's all the time I'm afraid that we have for our discussion today, and I'd like to thank Don Peppers and Jonathan Gray for sharing their fabulous insights with us. So because we've run out of time, any unanswered questions will be addressed by email. This concludes 5 Best Practices for Data-Driven Selling, a one-to-one webinar sponsored by Revana. On behalf of the entire team, thanks for attending, and have a great day.